Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a tale that's juicier than you'd expect, both literally and historically. You're standing in the damp grey drizzle of 17th century London. Your shoes are squelching, your cloak smells faintly of horse, and the streets aren't exactly fragrant. But suddenly, through the misty gloom, something stops you in your tracks. There, in the window of a well-dressed grocer's shop, sits an object so strange, so exotic, it almost doesn't look real. Its skin is tough and golden brown, its shape is spiky and symmetrical like a sea monster that got lost at a Renaissance fair, and the scent, if you're lucky enough to get a whiff, is unlike anything you've ever encountered. That, my friend, is a pineapple, and in this world you probably won't survive long enough, or earn enough to ever taste one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and while you're at it, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You first hear about the pineapple from sailors, wild tales of tropical heat, monstrous parrots, and a fruit so good it made grown men cry. The fruit came from the Caribbean, where it grew like weeds but was revered by native peoples for its sweetness and healing properties. When European explorers like Columbus stumbled upon them in the late 1400s, they had the kind of reaction you might reserve today for your first taste of gelato on an Italian piazza. Take it back, they said, we must have this. But you're not an explorer, you're a Georgian subject now, living under the powdered wig of King George I or II, maybe even III if you hang around long enough. In your time, pineapples are still impossibly rare. Just getting one from the Caribbean to England takes weeks on a ship that smells like old fish and ambition. Most don't survive the journey. The ones that do are bruised, mouldy, and often arrive as sad shadows of their former selves. Still, even a sad pineapple is better than no pineapple at all. When one does arrive in London, golden, upright, intact, it doesn't go unnoticed. Gentlemen stop to stare. Ladies gossip behind fans. Grocers treat it like a royal guest. The pineapple becomes an event. One famed incident has a merchant hosting a 3-day viewing party for his latest shipment, charging admission to simply gaze upon it. You don't get to touch it, of course. That would be madness. Historians still argue whether the earliest imported pineapples were even edible by the time they arrived. Some say they were more status symbol than snack. Others suggest that the elite would indeed eat them, though only at the height of a banquet, like a crowned jewel unveiled in candlelight. What's certain is that by the early 1700s, the pineapple has become a symbol of wealth, refinement, and global dominance. This spiky fruit, born in the tropics and raised in the sweat of enslaved labourers, now sits proudly on silver platters in English drawing rooms. It becomes a totem, a talking point, even a character in its own melodrama. You hear stories of dukes who time their dinner parties around the arrival of a particularly ripe pineapple. There's gossip that a certain earl mortgaged part of his estate just to fund a pineapple feast, and that a lord's daughter fainted, not from corset tightness, but from the sheer joy of licking a pineapple rind. The fruit is even painted into portraits, not alongside the family dog or a beloved child, but alone, like a celebrity. One famous painting shows Charles II receiving a pineapple from his gardener, with the same reverence usually reserved for religious iconography. Of course, scholars debate whether this moment ever really happened, or whether the pineapple was simply added later for, shall we say, dramatic flavour. Quirky detail alert. Some grocers reportedly hired small children to stand near pineapples in shop windows and fan them gently to prevent bruising. Whether this is fact or urban legend, we can't be sure, but it certainly fits the mood of a world obsessed with presentation. You also begin to notice pineapples popping up in unexpected places, carved above doorways, embroidered on waistcoats, etched into silver snuff boxes. The fruit that no one can afford to eat has become the ultimate sign of good taste. There's an edge of irony, though. The more the pineapple is paraded around, the less likely it is to be consumed. Eating it would be like setting fire to a Fabergé egg just to see what's inside. So, it becomes a borrowed thing, passed from party to party, like a celebrity guest who doesn't say much but always looks fabulous in photos. And through all this, you, an average subject, remain firmly on the outside. You know the smell. You've maybe touched the spiky skin on market day under strict supervision. But the taste? That's reserved for kings, dukes, and very lucky dinner guests. It's all a bit absurd. But then again, so is powdered hair, whalebone corsets, and the belief that taking a brisk walk through sulphur fog is good for your complexion. The pineapple in its golden glory fits right in. You wouldn't think a fruit could cost more than a townhouse in Bath, but here you are, living in an era where a single pineapple might set you back the equivalent of a year's income, if not more. If you're lucky enough to see one up close, you may even hear its whispered price tag floating between gossiping guests. £70 sterling. That's in Georgian money, mind you. Adjusted for inflation, that's the cost of a luxury car, or 3, depending on how ripe the deal is. This isn't a case of ordinary supply and demand. It's pineapple inflation powered by obsession. Imported pineapples were rare, sure, but it was the perception of status, of being the kind of person who could afford such a thing, that made their value skyrocket. A pineapple wasn't food, it was evidence, proof that you'd arrived, that you, unlike your gouty neighbour who still served pears, were truly at the peak of Georgian sophistication. To even touch a pineapple, let alone serve one, meant something. It meant you had connections, plantation ties, shipping networks, and enough wealth to casually place a golden spiked sculpture on your dining table and not even eat it. And yes, you read that right. Eating the pineapple was often considered gauche, destructive even, because once it was eaten its value vanished. So what did people do? Well, they rented them. Yes, rented. Pineapples became the Georgian equivalent of a red carpet gown. You didn't need to own one to benefit from its radiance. You could simply rent one for your dinner party, plop it onto a silver pedestal between your roast swan and your sculpted blancmange, and return it the next day, slightly more wilted but still standing tall. It was the fruit version of a reusable centerpiece, with perhaps less longevity than a good candelabra, but far more excitement. Of course, this system birthed a whole sub-economy. Grocers, aware of the high demand and delicate nature of their pineapples, started managing them like luxury assets. The most prized specimens were transported in custom cases, often lined with velvet or straw, and were delivered with more care than a firstborn. Sometimes a grocer would own a single pineapple for months, sending it from party to party, charging ever-increasing sums for its fading charm. Some London shops had pineapple ledgers, tracking which household had it on what date, like a very elite library book. Lord Pembroke, Tuesday through Thursday, Viscountess Redgrave, Friday for supper, return by Saturday noon or forfeit deposit. It gets even stranger. There are reports, again hotly debated by historians, that some of these pineapples never got eaten at all. Instead, once their outer flesh began to sag, they were preserved in wax, then repurposed as display items. You know, in case a party needed a quick prestige boost but didn't have time to source the real thing. And heaven help you if your rival throws a party the same week you do, and also rents the same pineapple. There were stories, quiet, petty stories, of high society hosts sneakily marking their pineapples with hidden wax initials, just to track who dared to rent it next. It was all about keeping up appearances. The pineapple, in its role as Georgian status prop, had nothing to do with hunger or nutrition. This was the era of ostentatious everything. Towering wigs, ruffled sleeves that could double as picnic blankets, and banquet tables so long they needed their own footman. The pineapple simply joined the chorus. One little-known anecdote involves a low-ranking merchant who spent his life savings importing a single pineapple for a business dinner, believing it would impress the East India Company representative seated across from him. The dinner was indeed a success, until someone knocked the pineapple off the table and it rolled directly into the fireplace. There it hissed, steamed, and was gone. The host reportedly burst into tears. The guest signed the trade deal anyway. Now, here's a historical mystery to chew on. Some researchers believe that certain hosts never purchased or rented real pineapples at all. Instead, they used props, elaborate wax models, carved wooden replicas, even cleverly painted papier-mâché pieces, and no one was the wiser. The lighting was dim, the admiration was fleeting, and let's be honest, who among the powdered elite had ever tasted a real pineapple anyway? The fruit had become a fiction, a shared fantasy. It represented something everyone wanted to be associated with, exoticism, wealth, refinement, but very few ever fully experienced. Kind of like a designer handbag you can't open, or a sports car that only turns left. This illusion was so powerful that it didn't even matter when people realized what was going on. As long as the idea of the pineapple was present, tall, symmetrical, vaguely glowing in candlelight, everyone played along. Guests complimented the fruit. Hosts pretended they'd grown it themselves, and the grocers chuckled all the way to the bank. So you, dear listener, wandering through this pineapple fever dream, begin to realise that the fruit is less a snack and more of a mirror. It reflects back everything Georgian England wants to believe about itself, that it is cultured, global, in control of nature and trade and heat and flavour, that it can tame the jungle and wear it as jewellery. You've now spent so many candlelit evenings admiring other people's pineapples that a dangerous idea takes root. What if you grew your own? Not just bought or borrowed, grew with your hands, in England, where the sun is about as reliable as a banker in a tavern. It sounds preposterous at first. Pineapples are tropical after all. They demand heat, moisture, and a certain smugness in their environment. 3 things sorely lacking in the British countryside. And yet in the early 1700s, you wouldn't be alone in trying. A wave of well-to-do English landowners becomes obsessed with this exact idea. Grow your own status symbol. Become not just a host, but a producer of prestige. You begin reading gardening manuals. You hire a botanist who insists on being paid in gold and imported nutmeg. You build a hothouse, your very own tropical palace for one fruit. These structures, initially simple wooden enclosures, soon evolve into architectural marvels. Glass walls, sloped roofs, coal-fired heating pipes that snake under the soil like some kind of underground dragon. You don't call it a greenhouse, of course. You call it a pinery. 1 pineapple, 1 pinery. An entire staff. That's the ratio. Growing a pineapple in Britain is like raising a tiger in your drawing room. It requires attention, patience, and the willingness to burn through enormous amounts of money for the promise of 1 perfect day. A single pineapple plant takes 2 years to produce a fruit. 2 years! That's assuming you don't accidentally cook it to death or freeze it solid on a misjudged February morning. Still, the elite persist, because success means immortality. Well, the Georgian version of it. Your name in local papers. Your guests murmuring with awe. Maybe even a painting commissioned to document your horticultural glory. Historians still argue whether this movement was more about botany or social climbing. The line between the two gets blurrier with every new estate that adds a pinery to its grounds. Gardening journals from the time are filled with dramatic entries. Today, I observed a browning of the crown. I have ordered additional straw and prayers. The pineapple becomes both scientific experiment and spiritual quest. One fringe account even tells of a gentleman who allegedly played harpsichord to his pineapple plants at dusk, convinced the vibrations would encourage them to ripen faster. Did it work? Almost certainly not. Did it matter? Absolutely not. Because gardening, in this world, isn't about outcome, it's about performance, and the performance is elaborate. Your gardener wears a special apron when tending to the pineapples. You instruct guests not to approach too closely. They're shy, you say, with a perfectly serious face. Some pineries have locked doors, accessible only to the owner and a trusted horticultural aide. Others are outfitted with chairs, tea trays, and even full-length mirrors, just in case someone needs to reflect while reflecting on a fruit. Of course, no obsession exists without rivalry. If your neighbour manages to ripen his pineapple 2 weeks before yours, it's practically a duel. Some gentry start keeping journals of pineapple growth, with watercolour illustrations to document each leaf's progress. There are rumours of gardeners being lured away in the dead of night with promises of higher wages and unlimited figs. Meanwhile, enterprising estate owners push the envelope. Some experiment with manure-heated beds, lining long trenches with horse dung to keep the roots warm. Others invest in elaborate pipe systems, directing hot air from kitchen stoves into their prized glass palaces. One legendary estate reportedly went so far as to pipe smoke from a tobacco room under its pinery, believing the subtle fumes would temper the fruit's temper. What no one quite agrees on is how successful all of this really was. Some historians suggest that true pineapple success was rare, and that most homegrown fruits never reached maturity. Others claim that a handful of estates did manage to produce edible pineapples, though often smaller, less sweet, and more ornamental than their Caribbean cousins. There are a few surviving journals that detail the first taste of an English-grown pineapple. Tart, astonishingly acidic, but oh, the joy, I nearly wept. And who wouldn't? After 2 years of labour, of tending a finicky plant in artificially tropical conditions, just to bite into something that vaguely resembled citrusy glory, you'd cry too. Still, the point wasn't always to eat the thing, it was to have it. Preferably before your neighbour did. It's at this point you realise that the pineapple had become a form of courtly one-upmanship. It wasn't just a fruit anymore, it was the botanical version of owning a personal orchestra, or having 12 horses for a carriage designed for 2. The irony, of course, is that most of these homegrown pineapples weren't necessarily better than imported ones. In fact, they were often worse, smaller, duller, less sweet. But they had something their imported cousins didn't, the power of narrative. You could tell a guest with great solemnity, "This one came from my grounds," and watch their pupils dilate with envy, even if the guest secretly preferred a good apple. Eventually pineapples begin appearing not just at parties but in conversations. "He's cultivating a pinery," becomes shorthand for, "he has more money than sense," and still others admire it. Because this is Georgian England. The rain is endless, the politics are maddening, and fruit that takes 2 years to ripen suddenly feels like a perfectly reasonable distraction. By now, you've walked the gravel paths of more than a few estates and something starts to catch your eye. Not just the pinery itself, but the peculiar structures surrounding it. Brick walls taller than 2 men, roofed passageways, rows of glass panels gleaming under perpetually overcast skies. You're entering the realm of pineapple architecture, structures built not for people, but for one very particular fruit. Welcome to the world of pineapple houses and hot walls. At first glance, it looks like a secret garden for fruit royalty. But no, this is science. Georgian science, which means equal parts cleverness and wild guesswork. The problem is heat. England simply doesn't have enough of it, so these landowners, ever determined to outdo one another, start building what are essentially tropical life support systems. Pineapple houses are purpose-built greenhouses, but calling them greenhouses feels too simple. These are meticulously designed glass palaces engineered to trick a Caribbean plant into thinking it's on vacation. Walls are lined with layers of insulation, brick, clay, even old animal hair stuffed between wooden slats. Heat is pumped in from flues beneath the floors, powered by stoves that must be constantly tended. Some houses have underground channels so warm air can float up and wrap the pineapple roots like a gentle hug. And then there are the hot walls. You walk up to one and press your hand against it. Warm, not blazing, but warm. These are not metaphorical walls for passionate debate. No, they are literal heated bricks. Behind the brickwork are flues, mini chimneys that snake through the wall and vent smoke out the top. Stoves placed at either end burn coal or wood, sending warmth through the network like central heating for fruit. The pineapples, nestled in front of these walls in pots or shallow beds, bask in this unnatural summer like pampered aristocrats. And just like aristocrats, they're wildly temperamental. Too much heat and they wilt. Too little and they sulk. The gardener's job is to walk this thermal tightrope daily, adjusting temperatures like a moody stage manager before opening night. Now, hot walls aren't exclusive to pineapples. They're also used for peaches, grapes, and other diva fruits. But pineapples, they require the most fuss, the most devotion, the most money. And speaking of money, here's where things get especially absurd. Some hot walls span the entire length of a garden. That's over 100 feet of heat-emitting masonry. Maintaining them is no casual affair. You need firewood, you need servants, you need a constant eye on the flue vents to prevent accidental pineapple flambe. One misstep, and your fruit could turn into a soggy, overheated lump in hours. And yet, these walls become symbols. Having one is a flex. Showing it to visitors is a declaration. I care about fruit, and I am not poor. You stroll along your hot wall casually, pointing out the faint hiss of steam. Guests nod approvingly. They don't really understand how it works, but that's beside the point. Even the royal family joins in. Queen Charlotte, wife of George III, reportedly had her own pineapple house at Kew Gardens. It was a place of pride, maintained by the best horticulturists in the kingdom. The pineapples were not eaten lightly, sometimes not eaten at all, but the fact that they existed was enough. Historians still argue whether these structures were ever cost-effective. Was it worth building a wall and a stove just for the chance of one successful fruit per year? Probably not. But rationality was never the goal. Appearances were. The pineapple's presence, framed by a hot wall, turned any garden into a stage. You weren't just growing fruit, you were hosting a show, and the props. Oh, the props. You find thermometers imported from France, watering cans crafted from polished copper, mirrors angled to reflect more sunlight into the glass enclosures. One estate even experimented with cowhide covers, tiny jackets for pineapples to prevent cold damage on especially frosty nights. Yes, they were custom sewn. The fruit begins to inspire the design of the houses themselves. Some greenhouses take on pineapple-like shapes, rounded tops, fluted glass, even spiked cupolas. The most famous example of this architectural devotion, the Dunmore pineapple in Scotland. You walk up to it now in your imagination, a massive stone structure crowned with an ornate carved pineapple. It's part folly, part greenhouse, and all theatre. It's said to have been built in the 1760s by the Earl of Dunmore, possibly as a pineapple house, possibly as a monument to his love for the fruit, or maybe just because he could. No one's quite sure, but it's there, regal, strange, utterly unnecessary, and completely perfect for its time. This moment, walking beside a heated wall, looking up at a spiky stone fruit, is where you start to understand something deeper about Georgian England. This wasn't just about agriculture or aesthetics, it was about control, about bending the natural world to your will, about proving through architecture that you could coax the impossible into bloom, even if that meant building a palace for a single pineapple. You've walked past the hot walls, peeked into the glass pineries, and marvelled at pineapples wearing their own jackets. But what happens when you don't have the land, the staff, or the endless budget to raise a fruit from soil to crown? You improvise. You go to your grocer, or, if you're truly daring, a pineapple broker, and you rent one. Yes, you've arrived at the height of Georgian fruit absurdity, the pineapple rental craze. It begins innocently enough. Imported pineapples are so rare and expensive that people start to treat them like heirlooms. But fruit spoils, and no one wants to spend £70 on something that will ferment before the roast is carved. Enter the solution: short-term pineapple rentals. Imagine this. You're hosting a dinner party. Your table is set. The candles are lit. Your guests are dripping with powdered faces and aristocratic boredom. How do you dazzle them? You place a golden pineapple right in the centre of the table, glistening under the candlelight like a tropical crown. Nobody eats it. That would be gauche. Instead, they admire it. They talk about it. They maybe lean in to catch the scent. It becomes the evening's conversation starter, like a dinner guest who doesn't say much but always looks good in the light. You, of course, return it the next day, slightly bruised, maybe a bit softer than before, but still in decent condition for the next party on the rental ledger. The rental business becomes a whole economy of illusion. Some grocers specialise in display-only fruit, pineapples chosen not for their flavour, but for their symmetry and skin tone. These pineapples are primped, polished, and propped up like beauty contestants, rotated between events like antique centerpieces. There are reports of pineapples that made it through a dozen parties without ever being cut. In some cases, they were eventually preserved in wax and displayed permanently in glass cloches, like museum relics of good taste. One particularly cheeky story tells of a merchant who labelled his pineapple for display purposes only and charged more not to eat it. And yes, clients paid it gladly, because the real value was never in the taste, it was in the optics. And it wasn't just the elite who got in on the game. The growing middle class, eager to emulate aristocratic habits, began renting pineapples for weddings, baby naming feasts, and even funerals. A pineapple at a funeral? Why not? It was a sign that the deceased had style, even in death. Now, historians still argue whether pineapple rentals were truly widespread, or whether the whole concept has been exaggerated by later writers eager for a juicy anecdote. There's no centralised registry of pineapple loans, no ledger labelled Lady Havisham's fruit rotation, 1772. But there are newspaper clippings, journal entries, and a suspicious number of illustrations from the time showing pineapples perched smugly in the background of dinner scenes. And honestly, even if only a few pineapples were rented, the cultural weight of the idea stuck. Everyone knew someone who had borrowed a pineapple. It became part of the social theatre. A knowing wink, a whispered admission, ours is a rental. Oh, don't worry, so is ours. But of course this led to complications. Picture it. Two rival families accidentally rent the same pineapple in the same week. One host gets Friday, the other Saturday. Guests compare notes. Scandal erupts. By Monday, the fruit is returned with lipstick smudges, 3 needle pricks, someone did try to taste it, and a small dent from being dropped by a child. Still, even in its battered state, the pineapple maintains its aura. You don't need it to be fresh. You just need it to be seen. Quirkier still, some clever hosts started adding fake pineapple accessories, silver trays, mirrored pedestals, even hand-painted pineapple-themed napkins to enhance the illusion. One upper-class household is rumoured to have commissioned a velvet carrying case for their pineapple rental, complete with gold stitching and a small monogrammed tag. Because if you're renting prestige, you might as well do it with flair, and this isn't just a Georgian one-off. The idea of rented luxury crops up repeatedly in history. Tiaras, wigs, horses, cufflinks, even professional mourners. People have long been willing to borrow status symbols to boost their image, if only for an evening. The pineapple, however, remains one of the most delightfully impractical examples. There's something beautifully fragile about it all. The effort to possess, if only temporarily, something you can't afford to destroy, something too valuable to eat, too symbolic to slice. A fruit that exists more in meaning than in mouthfeel. And it makes you think, what else in life do we hold on to? Not for its substance, but for the story it lets us tell about ourselves. As the pineapple completes another stop on its Georgian tour, it becomes not just a rented fruit, but a borrowed dream. A spiky, golden, slightly squishy dream passed from table to table, trailing whispers of candle smoke, perfume, and powdered ambition. You've seen pineapples rented, revered, and passed around like celebrity guests. But now you step into a Georgian drawing room where something even more surreal is happening. A man stands proudly next to an oil painting. It's not of his wife, not of a child or even a prize stallion. No, he's pointing, rather smugly, to a portrait of himself holding a pineapple. This is the pineapple portrait phenomenon, and its peak Georgian indulgence. You lean in. The gentleman in the painting is dressed to the nines, brocade waistcoat, powdered wig, ruffled sleeves flaring like festive trumpets. But your eye goes straight to the fruit. It gleams with uncanny polish, propped up like a trophy, and you begin to wonder, is it his pineapple, or just a prop? That's the delicious mystery. See, by the mid-1700s, being seen with a pineapple was such a status move that people began immortalising it in art. If you couldn't grow one, or rent one often enough, you could still pay to be painted with one. Artists, always happy to oblige, began including pineapples as symbols of exotic wealth, global trade, and genteel taste. And make no mistake, these were not accidental props. The pineapple was carefully composed, often placed in the foreground, its spikes subtly echoing the sitter's lace cuffs, or its golden tones catching the light just so. Sometimes it rested on a marble pedestal, other times it was held delicately like a newborn. In one particularly flamboyant portrait, a naval officer holds a pineapple aloft like a sceptre, as if claiming dominion over the very tropics. But here's the catch. Historians still argue whether most of these pineapples were real. Theories abound. Some suggest that travelling artists simply carried a prop pineapple from commission to commission, like a mobile status fruit. Others believe artists copied a generic fruit design into their canvases without any real pineapple ever being present, sort of like a 1700s Photoshop filter. There's also the awkward question of truth. Did these men actually own the pineapples they were painted with? Some certainly did. Wealthy merchants who imported the fruit themselves, or nobles with estate-grown crops, but many didn't. And yet the presence of the pineapple helped reinforce the illusion that they had the means, the reach, the taste. You imagine commissioning your own portrait. Make sure the fruit is visible, you tell the artist, and try to make it look as if I've just returned from the West Indies. Whether or not you've ever been on a boat is irrelevant, and it wasn't just men getting fruity. Georgian women also entered the scene. One famous painting features a well-dressed lady extending a pineapple like an offering, her expression demure, almost reverent. It's as if she's saying, "Look what my gardener coaxed from the soil. Marriage material, surely?" Another portrait shows a child beside a pineapple-laden table, the fruit positioned higher than the child's head, as if to say, "This fruit is the real heir." This blending of self-image and fruit symbolism wasn't new to art. Banquets, chalices, and laurel wreaths had long been used to signal wealth or power. But the pineapple added something new, a splash of imperial exoticism. It suggested you had reached beyond England, that you were plugged into the empire, that your wealth wasn't just local, it was global. A few painters, cheekily aware of the absurdity, even played with the concept. In one portrait from 1760, a butler in the background balances a pineapple on a silver tray, but if you look closely, his expression seems less servant-like and more conspiratorial, as if he's in on the joke. Can you believe they paid 20 guineas to borrow this thing? Of course, as the pineapple trend bloomed in art, it spilled over into satire. Cartoonists began drawing exaggerated versions of pineapple posers, noblemen so obsessed they wear pineapples on their heads or duel over the fruit's honour. One pamphlet mocks a politician by depicting him presenting a pineapple to Parliament as if it were a bill of law. Another shows a woman swooning, not because of romance, but because someone else's pineapple looked riper. But satire or not, the pineapple portrait persisted. Weirdly, it also expanded. People started incorporating pineapples into family portraits, not just as accessories, but as part of the narrative. You'd have Dad with his hand resting on the fruit, Mum standing beside him, looking virtuous. Kids posed like cherubs with a pineapple between them, symbolising not just wealth, but harmony. The family that fruits together, roots together. One slightly bonkers trend involved staging portraits in the pinery itself. You'd drag a chair into the humid glasshouse, pose next to the ripening pineapple, and try not to sweat through your linen while the painter captured the moment. A tropical scene in a temperate land. Vanity, now with heat stroke. And this phenomenon wasn't limited to England. In the Netherlands, France, and even parts of Germany, pineapples start appearing in still-life paintings with increasing frequency. A pineapple next to a silver goblet. A pineapple nestled among imported spices. Always framed in soft light, always a little too pristine to be believable. Historians today use these portraits as cultural barometers. Where the pineapple shows up, wealth anxiety usually follows. It's the Georgian equivalent of driving a luxury car into your own painting. Immobile, silent, but packed with unspoken status. You pause, imagining the artist's hand dabbing in golden paint on each segment of the pineapple's scaly skin, hours spent perfecting the curl of each leaf. Because when it came to pineapple portraits, the fruit always looked better than the people, and that perhaps was the point. You're back in the drawing room, the portrait behind you still smirking with its painted pineapple, but now you smell something. Not paint, not waxed wood. Something roasted, spiced, almost absurd. You follow the scent down a corridor into a vast candlelit dining hall where a towering spectacle rises in the centre of the table. Not a swan, not a boar's head. It's a multi-tiered edible sculpture, glistening fruits, sugared petals, and perched triumphantly at the top like royalty, a pineapple. You've entered the deliciously dramatic world of edible architecture and banquet theatre. Here the pineapple isn't just admired, it's staged. Banquets in Georgian England are no mere meals, they're performances, and pineapples are the undisputed headliners, especially when it comes to dessert, the final course, the grand reveal. You take your seat, well, not your seat. You're a humble observer in this fantasy, and marvel as footmen unveil the centrepiece. It's called a surtout de table, a showy decorative piece sometimes edible, sometimes sculptural, always ridiculous. In this case, the base is moulded sugar and pastry, shaped like a neoclassical temple. Climbing up its sides, spun sugar vines, candied pears, and marzipan cherubs. And at the very top, because of course, is that golden pineapple, polished to the point of reflection. No one touches it. No one dares. It just sits there, haloed in candlelight, as if commanding the entire meal. This was the age of sugarwork and spectacle. Georgian chefs were expected not only to cook, but to sculpt. Pineapples were surrounded by fluted jellies, moulded creams, and towers of biscuits. If a dessert didn't shimmer, wobble, or lean dramatically, was it even worth serving? One diary entry from a lady's maid describes a dessert table at a duke's wedding, featuring an entire island scene made of nougat, sugar paste, and tinted gelatin. At its centre, a boat made from caramelised pastry carrying a pineapple as if it were fleeing war by sea. Was this excessive? Yes. Was it deeply fun? Also, yes. Historians still argue whether such displays were ever fully edible, or if parts were designed solely for shock and awe. More sugar than sense, one contemporary critic wrote. One fears to eat, lest the table collapse under its own symbolism. But it wasn't just nobility playing this game. Wealthy merchants got in on the action too. A middle-class tradesman who imported silks might host a pineapple supper, hiring out a banquet hall and paying a chef to construct a table-sized fruit city, complete with candied walls and jelly moats. The pineapple naturally would sit at City Hall. And the guests. Oh, the guests loved it. They didn't need to eat the fruit. Being near it was enough. It was flavour by proximity. You overhear one woman whisper, "It's my first pineapple sighting." Her eyes shine with reverence. Another nods solemnly, as if they've just viewed a sacred relic. In fact, the mere promise of pineapple could elevate an event. Some invitations were rumoured to include a drawing of the planned pineapple centrepiece, as if to say, "Yes, we know you're busy, but there will be pineapple." And that was enough to fill the room. Quirky detail? One ambitious host had his footmen dress as pineapple gardeners for the evening, complete with fake dirt under their nails. Another had a mechanical table centrepiece that rotated slowly, allowing everyone a view of the fruit's best side. Because even a pineapple has angles, darling. Now all this theatricality didn't come cheap. For some, it became a form of financial ruin, blowing one's fortune on flambéed excess. Satirical poems warned of men who lost their lands to candied hands, or women who wed for fruit and wept in debt. The pineapple became a kind of edible Icarus. Fly too close, and your sugar wings will melt. One of the more fringe practices during this era was pineapple burning. Yes, burning. Not out of anger, but as an ultimate symbol of wealth. After a banquet, some hosts, in a final gesture of absurdity, would throw the uneaten pineapple into the fire. It said, "I can afford to waste this." The guests would gasp. Some would applaud. Others might clutch their pearls. But no one would ever forget it. A waste? Surely. But again, it wasn't about consumption. It was about story. The pineapple became part of dinner gossip, passed between mouthfuls of syllabub and scandal. Did you see Lord Winslow's pineapple? Larger than a babe's head. Yes, but I hear Lady Wexford's was hollow inside. Symbolic, no. Well, at least they didn't burn theirs. And you, taking it all in, realise that the fruit has transcended its botanical roots. It's no longer just a plant from the tropics. It's a prism, a lens through which an entire society sees itself, glittering, anxious, performative, and deeply hungry for meaning more than flavour. You lean back in your chair. Someone taps their spoon against a crystal glass. The conversation dips to a hush. A servant steps forward with a silver knife. You wonder, will they actually cut it? But they don't. Of course they don't. The knife hovers. Someone coughs. The pineapple lives another night. You step outside the dining hall, still dazzled by the pineapple that wasn't eaten. You're digesting more metaphor than food at this point, but as the cold air hits your face, another story begins to take shape. One that smells less like sugar and more like salt, sweat, and smoke. Behind every pineapple on a silver tray there's a ship. Behind every ship there's a port. And behind every port, well, there's an empire. Tonight you're following the fruit backwards. You're tracing it not from plate to plant, but from plantation to parlour. Welcome to the tangled tale of trade, theft, and tropical scandal. First, the ships. Pineapples didn't magically appear on British soil. They came from the Caribbean, carried across the Atlantic in conditions that were, let's say, not ideal for fragile produce. Ships were hot, damp, infested with rats, and perpetually tilted. A pineapple packed in straw had to survive storms, mildew, and the occasional sailor with sticky fingers. And yet, some made it. Barely. One story tells of a grocer in Bristol who received a single pineapple with most of its crown missing. Rather than waste it, he mounted the surviving half on a silver base and displayed it anyway. A pineapple fragment is still a pineapple, he told skeptics. And yes, people came to see it. But the real scandal begins before the fruit even boards the boat. You're in Jamaica now, or maybe Barbados. The year is somewhere in the early 1700s. Plantation fields stretch into the distance, dotted with enslaved labourers who tend pineapples alongside sugarcane, coffee, and citrus. The sun is relentless. The work is brutal. And here, pineapples grow easily, too easily in fact, for their value to be recognised by the people forced to pick them. Historians still debate whether pineapples were grown specifically for export, or more often consumed locally and occasionally lifted for British tastes. What's agreed upon is that the empire used its colonies to supply the mainland with luxury at staggering human cost. And yes, pineapples were sometimes stolen, not by pirates necessarily, but by opportunists, dock workers, plantation middlemen, even rival merchants. If you could smuggle a ripe pineapple aboard the right ship, you might sell it in London for a small fortune. One report mentions a London merchant whose Caribbean relations sent him fruits that mysteriously didn't appear on any official ledger. He sold them by candlelight from the back of his counting house, charging more than a surgeon's annual salary. Quirky detail? Some shippers wrapped pineapples in cloth soaked with brandy, hoping the alcohol would preserve them longer and discourage mould. Others dipped the crown in wax to seal in moisture, creating a fruit that looked oddly like a scented candle by the time it reached British docks. Theft wasn't the only issue. There were also, let's call them pineapple exaggerations. Some grocers, knowing most customers had never seen a fresh pineapple, would pass off unripe or even counterfeit fruits as premium imports. There's a fantastic anecdote about a shopkeeper in Bath who glued pineapple leaves onto a gourd and called it Jamaican gold. The customer, too polite or too uninformed to question it, posed with the imposter for a portrait. The painting still hangs today, fooling art historians. This was the era of the pineapple hustle. Even respectable traders cut corners. Some paid captains under the table for priority fruit handling. Others bribed customs agents to skip inspections. One bold scheme involved staging a fruit emergency to get a shipment fast-tracked through port quarantine. The reason listed? Royal wedding, critical need. Of course, most pineapples didn't arrive alone. They travelled with sugar barrels, tobacco bales, cacao sacks, and the unspoken legacy of enslaved labour. The pineapple was just one glittering piece of a much darker puzzle, the kind of detail politely left out of dinner conversations. You begin to understand. The pineapple isn't just expensive because it's rare. It's expensive because it comes loaded with risk, with scandal, with stories. Every perfect fruit is a survivor, a smuggled treasure, a velvet-wrapped bribe in botanical form. Some Georgian hosts knew this. Others didn't want to know. But the pineapple's mystique only grew. It became fashionable to say things like, "Mine came direct from Port Royal," or "shipped under seal from St. Kitts." Whether or not this was true didn't matter. What mattered was the impression, that you had connections, that your fruit had provenance. At the same time, artists and decorators began using pineapple motifs to suggest worldliness. A pineapple painted above a doorway hinted at mercantile power. A pineapple-shaped doorknob, empire at your fingertips. And through it all, the fruit kept travelling, sometimes above board, sometimes tucked beneath blankets in secret crates. Once, a London auction house sold a batch of imported pineapples for charity. They raised more money than a church bell. So you sit back now, candlelight flickering, and imagine the journey of that single fruit you saw in the painting. Imagine the stormy ocean, the sleepless sailor watching for mould, the merchant counting coins behind closed curtains, the whisper of scandal in every bite, and you realise, somewhere along the line, the pineapple stopped being a fruit and became a fable. You return now to the heart of England, a place far from the Caribbean shores and plantation fields, yet pulsing with the same hunger. You walk through a market square, the fog curling around iron lamp-posts. There's laughter, chatter, the clip of hooves, and above it all the subtle tension of a country obsessed with class. This is where the pineapple enters its next role, a weapon in the great Georgian class performance. You stop by a bakery window, loaves of bread, tarts, and, in the centre, a tiny cake shaped like a pineapple. It's made of sugar and illusion. It tells a story. We may not have real pineapples, but we understand what they mean. Because by now, the pineapple isn't just for the elite, it's for aspiration. The rising merchant class, shopkeepers, lawyers and tradesmen, they all want a taste, literally or symbolically. And while they may not own sprawling estates or hot-walled pineries, they do have money, enough to rent a pineapple, or to commission a wax replica, or to decorate their mantle with pineapple-shaped urns. It starts subtly. Embroidered pineapples on waistcoats, pineapple-shaped sugar bowls, pineapple buttons. But then it grows bolder. Pineapple sculptures in gardens. Pineapple-shaped fountains. There's even a brief trend of pineapple-themed wallpaper. Though it's criticised for making parlours feel like fruit stalls, historians still debate how much the upper classes resented this symbolic grab. Some evidence suggests nobles rolled their eyes when middle-class hosts unveiled their pineapple centrepiece, a knowing smirk, a murmur of "how quaint." Others say the elite welcomed it. It validated their own obsession after all. Still, class tensions rise. A pineapple becomes a social test. Is it yours? Did you grow it? Rent it? Fake it? Guests begin quietly inspecting the fruit at parties. One hostess is said to have wept after a guest poked her wax pineapple and whispered, "Oh darling, it's hollow." And that's the thing. Pineapples revealed everything. Who you were, who you pretended to be, and who you wanted to become. Owning one, even symbolically, gave you a kind of social armour. Not owning one? That was noticeable. There's a story, half true, half rumour, about a clergyman's wife who painted a pineapple on her tea service and claimed it was a family crest. When a visiting duchess asked where the fruit was grown, the hostess replied, "On a hill, madam, near Grace and Providence." The duchess nearly choked on her lemon curd. The pineapple also creeps into satire. Cartoonists draw middle-class climbers with pineapples balanced precariously on their heads, as if trying too hard to prove their taste. One poem mocks a tailor who buys a pineapple for his shop window, hoping it'll attract aristocratic clients. The punchline: "They came not for coats, but the fruit's noble pose. He starved in his silk while the pineapple rose." And yet, the middle class keeps reaching. You see shop signs featuring pineapples, inns named the golden fruit, tea shops boasting pineapple-flavoured cordial, even if the flavour comes from apple vinegar and imagination. It's marketing before marketing had a name. But beneath the playful envy and performative elegance, something deeper stirs. A few radical thinkers begin to question the entire pineapple frenzy. Pamphlets emerge, criticising the obsession as emblematic of a broken society, where a fruit matters more than fairness, where appearances outweigh compassion. What nation, one writer asks, builds greenhouses for fruit while children freeze? These voices are fringe mostly, but they highlight something real. The pineapple has become a mirror. It reflects the divide. It separates those who can afford to grow illusions from those who must borrow them. And yet, the allure remains. Quirky note: there's a documented instance of a poor seamstress saving for over a year to buy a single pineapple. She presented it to her fiancé as a wedding gift. They didn't eat it. They kept it on a shelf until it rotted. Then they dried the leaves, framed them, and told the story for the rest of their lives. Because for many, the pineapple wasn't food. It was a dream, an object of longing, rich with meaning, a promise wrapped in spikes. You step back into the square. The bakery has closed. The fog is thick now, and somewhere in the silence you feel the tension between want and worth, image and reality. The pineapple may be sweet, but in Georgian England it always had a bitter rind. You're indoors again, stepping into a cosy, cluttered Georgian sitting room. There's a faint scent of coal smoke and beeswax polish, and a fire crackling gently in the grate. Your eyes land on the mantel, not a portrait, not a book, but something ceramic. It's shaped like a pineapple. This is not food. This is pineapple pottery, and you're about to discover how the spiky fruit that nobody ate managed to infiltrate every crevice of domestic life. You wander through the parlour. There are pineapple-shaped sugar bowls, pineapple print teacups, a pineapple-shaped biscuit tin. The host offers you a pineapple cordial, which tastes mostly like tart citrus and questionable brandy. But it doesn't matter, it's the gesture, the symbolism. Because by the mid-1700s, pineapples had become more than a symbol of status. They had become a full-blown aesthetic. Everything from textiles to tableware got the pineapple treatment. Pineapple patterns were embroidered on cushions. Pineapple-shaped finials crowned bedposts. There were pineapples carved into stair railings, stitched into waistcoats, even painted above fireplaces like cosy tropical gargoyles. Why? Because the pineapple meant hospitality, or at least that's what people said. Historians still debate the origin of this belief. Some trace it to the Caribbean, where indigenous peoples may have offered pineapples as signs of welcome to European visitors. Others believe it was a purely British invention, a convenient excuse to turn a pricey fruit into a social metaphor. "Come in," the pineapple says. "We're gracious, and we can afford ornamental fruit." Either way, the idea stuck. Quirky little twist. Some chamber pots were shaped like pineapples. Yes, chamber pots, as in toilets. There's one preserved in a museum, made of porcelain, with pineapple leaves sprouting delicately from the lid. Apparently nothing says sophistication quite like doing your business inside an exotic fruit. And it wasn't just the upper class indulging in pineapple decor. The rising middle class, hungry for symbols of gentility, filled their homes with pineapple motifs, whether or not they'd ever seen the real thing. It became a kind of shorthand for refinement, a domestic version of fake it till you make it. One popular item? Pineapple butter moulds. You'd press your homemade butter into a small wooden mould, and out popped a delicately shaped pineapple pat. It didn't taste like pineapple, but it looked the part, and that was what mattered. You spot a pineapple ink pot, an utterly unnecessary object made of pewter and mother of pearl. A travelling merchant might carry it in his satchel and whip it out dramatically while signing contracts. Pineapple pen equals power move. Over in the corner of the room, a pineapple-shaped clock ticks quietly. It's terribly impractical, with its hand set awkwardly across the curve of the rind. But it's beautiful. And that's enough. This period also saw the rise of pineapple ceramics, mass-produced in Stoke-on-Trent, Derby and other famed pottery towns. Some were dainty and expensive, made of bone china and painted with gold leaf. Others were more humble, simple glazed earthenware in sunny yellows and greens, designed to brighten up a modest parlour. There's even a documented case of a working-class couple saving to buy a matching pineapple tea set for their anniversary. It was proudly displayed behind glass for years and only used on birthdays and bank holidays. Their children weren't allowed to touch it. It was, as one of them later wrote, as sacred as the wedding vows. In this era, the pineapple wasn't just a fruit. It was a motif, a promise, a reminder that one could grasp in some small way the grandeur of empire, the thrill of far-off lands, and the elegance of the elite, even if only in the form of a biscuit jar. One fringe phenomenon was the use of pineapples in funerary art. A few gravestones from the period include pineapple carvings, believed to represent the hospitality of the deceased. He welcomed guests as he welcomes eternity, one epitaph reads, which frankly raises questions. By the late 18th century, pineapple-themed design had become so common that a few trendsetters began to roll their eyes. One lady reportedly refused to sit in a friend's parlour, saying it looked like a fruit cart overturned on an ottoman. The backlash had begun. But that didn't stop the trend. Even garden ornaments joined the party. You walk outside through a frost-bitten English lawn and spot two large stone pineapples flanking the garden gate. They stand there like fruity sentinels guarding the flower beds. You later learn they're meant to invite serenity, possibly, or just to show the neighbours you had some spare granite and a thing for symmetry. There's even a myth, still repeated today, that sailors returning from sea would impale pineapples on their gateposts to signal that they were home and open to visitors. Historians doubt this actually happened, but it's the kind of charming fiction people love to believe. And perhaps that's the real magic of pineapple decor. It's not about facts, it's about feeling. The pineapple, replicated in wood, cloth, porcelain and pastry, became the Georgian dream distilled into an object. Elegant, exotic, and not entirely real. You run your hand along the cool ceramic of the pineapple teapot. You imagine its owner pouring guests tiny cups of tea, smiling softly as they comment on the design. "Oh, thank you," she says. "It was a wedding gift from someone very well travelled." Was it true? Probably not. But in Georgian England, appearances were everything, and no appearance was more charming than a pineapple that never spoiled. You're standing in a drawing room that smells faintly of beeswax and ambition, and you've just admired more pineapple-themed decor than any fruit deserves. But now comes a twist that would make any Georgian host raise an eyebrow. You reach toward what appears to be a very fine, very golden pineapple centerpiece, glowing softly under the chandelier. Your fingers graze the rind, and it gives slightly. Too slightly. Because this is not a pineapple at all. This is a fake. Welcome to the world of fake fruits and fabricated prestige, where deception comes in wax, wood and papier-mâché, and your social standing depends on how good the illusion looks in candlelight. As the pineapple craze surged and real fruits remained rare, expensive and wildly perishable, people found a solution as elegant as it was deceitful: replicas. handmade imitations crafted to look just close enough to the real thing that no one dared question them, especially not after a few glasses of claret. And these weren't slapdash school project models. No, these were artisan pieces, wax pineapples, sculpted leaf by leaf, dyed to perfection, carved wooden ones painted with tiny flecks to mimic bruising, papier-mâché pineapples so convincing they reportedly fooled a duke's butler into refrigerating one for 3 days. Quirky detail: some fake pineapples were scented, rubbed with citrus oil or clove to give them a vaguely fruity aura. If a guest leaned in for a sniff, they'd be rewarded with a mysterious tropical fragrance and zero suspicion. Theatres, of course, adored them. Pineapples were stage shorthand for wealth and exoticism, appearing in plays about colonial conquest or foreign intrigue. You couldn't have an island paradise on stage without at least one fake pineapple. Stagehands would repaint the same prop fruit night after night. In some cases, these props outlasted the careers of the actors who passed them around. But it wasn't just the stage or the upper crust joining the ruse. Middle-class hosts eager to keep up began investing in fake pineapples for display at dinner parties, weddings, christenings, anywhere a bit of fruity flair was needed. And since most people had never handled a real pineapple, it was surprisingly easy to fool the eye. Historians still argue over just how widespread this fakery was. Some insist it was confined to theatrical circles and ambitious decorators. Others believe it was much more common, with grocers even renting out replicas for those who couldn't afford the real deal, or who didn't want to risk spoilage ruining their social event. One merchant's diary mentions a model fruit room, where wax pineapples were displayed among other tropical replicas. Clients could choose one for rent, sometimes paired with a written description to be recited to guests. Harvested near Port Antonio, Jamaica, ripened under a crimson sun. All lies. Glorious, juicy lies. And let's not forget the DIYers. Some ambitious homemakers crafted their own fake pineapples using surprisingly creative materials. Hollowed out turnips, dried gourds, pine cones glued to melons, anything with the right shape and some imagination. You can picture the pride. I made it myself, darling. Took 3 days and half a bottle of varnish. Of course, the ruse didn't always hold. One unlucky couple hosted a dinner party in Bristol where a guest, slightly tipsy and very bold, stabbed the centerpiece pineapple with a dessert fork. The paper shell collapsed instantly, revealing a hollow centre and what was either stuffing or shredded newspaper. The hostess fainted. The fake fruit was later burned in the garden. Still, most fakes held up just fine, because again, no one really wanted to expose them. It was a collective performance. Guests would ooh and ah. Hosts would beam, and the pineapple would sit there in dignified silence, pretending to be real. Even more surreal, some people took their fake pineapples to portrait sessions, commissioning likenesses with fruits they never actually owned. One such painting features a prominent barrister holding a pineapple that experts now believe was carved from soapstone. But at the time, it worked. He rose in society. Was it the wig, the gaze, or the fruit? Who can say? There were entire shops in London rumoured to specialise in fake pineapples. Behind curtains and backroom shelves, you could purchase display-grade replicas, some of which were crafted with more care than the average wedding cake. These shops often served clients discreetly, because while fake fruit was socially acceptable, it wasn't exactly advertised. Owning one was fine. Admitting it was another story. The irony, of course, is that the fake pineapple often outlived the real one, literally and figuratively. Real pineapples bruised, rotted, fermented. Fakes, however, remained pristine. They didn't wilt under candlelight. They didn't attract flies. They just stood there, eternal, a perfect emblem of artificial perfection in an era obsessed with appearances. And perhaps that's why they thrived. You think of a society where the truth was less important than the illusion, where what mattered wasn't what you had, but what people thought you had. A society that would build heated walls for a fruit, then sculpt it in wax when reality proved too inconvenient. You reach out again toward that fake pineapple, now fully aware of its ruse, and this time you smile. Because in Georgian England, even lies came gilded. You're walking through a city street now, not the quiet manor roads of the countryside, but the cobbled, clattering, soot-dusted avenues of London in the late 18th century. Carriages rattle, fishmongers shout, and the smell of roasted chestnuts mixes with horse sweat and coal smoke, And yet even here, amidst the grime and clamour, the pineapple still reigns. Only now. People are laughing at it. This is the beginning of the backlash. The golden crown is slipping. Welcome to the era of satire and slow spoilage, when the pineapple begins to tumble from its pedestal. One cartoon, one poem, one dinner party jab at a time. You stop by a bookstall. A satirical print catches your eye. A portly gentleman in a powdered wig trying to balance a pineapple on his head while tripping over a servant carrying a tureen of soup. The caption reads, "The weight of good taste." Another shows a wedding couple embracing as a giant pineapple hovers above them like a deity. "In fruit we trust." The punchlines are starting to sting. Why? Because the pineapple, once a gleaming symbol of refinement, has become too visible, too copied, too mimicked. The elite resent its democratization. The middle class is growing tired of pretending. And the working class, they're amused. The pineapple has become the butt of the joke, an emblem of superficial ambition, the tryhard's favourite fruit. You enter a coffee house, buzzing with wigs, tobacco smoke and dry wit. A gentleman is loudly reading from a mock-epic poem. "O noble fruit from foreign shore, that none dare eat and all adore, thou waxen idol of the feast, sweet scent of wealth, and taste of least." Polite laughter. A few guffaws. One man claps. Satirical poetry becomes a favourite medium for pineapple critique. One verse refers to it as the spiky lie, another as fruit of the fools. The jokes aren't mean-spirited, just wry, knowing, gently deflating. It's as if society collectively woke up from a sugar coma and realised, this is a lot of fuss for something that's mostly water and fibre. One fringe pamphlet titled "On the Great Pineapple Madness" makes the rounds in salons and universities. It declares the fruit a tyrant of taste, suggesting that it rules the table like a monarch, but contributes nothing to the nourishment of the people. The metaphor is obvious, and just subtle enough to avoid sedition charges. Historians still argue over how widespread this backlash really was. Was it genuine satire or just playful ribbing among the fashionable crowd? Did it reflect cultural exhaustion, or simply the natural evolution of a trend? One thing is clear. By the late 1700s, the pineapple had become more than a status symbol. It had become a symbol of trying too hard. The kind of thing your eccentric uncle built an entire orangery for, but that your clever cousin now mocked with a papier-mâché centrepiece and an ironic wink. Even fashion gets in on the joke. Pineapple-shaped fans appear at masquerade balls. Pineapple wigs, yes, actual wigs styled into pineapple shapes, are documented at a handful of extremely questionable parties. You picture it now, a room full of people swaying beneath chandeliers, sipping pineapple-flavoured cordial, their heads bobbing with green-spiked coiffures. One hostess throws a pineapple farewell ball in 1792. Everything is pineapple-themed, cakes, music, even dance cards shaped like little pineapples. But the twist? The hostess gives a speech halfway through declaring she's retiring from the fruit, that she's done pretending it's worth the trouble. The crowd cheers, one guest faints. Quirky moment? A theatre group stages a parody titled Pineapple Promenade, in which a young couple's engagement falls apart when they both try to claim the same pineapple at auction. The story ends with the fruit being thrown out the window to applause, and you start to feel it too, the shift in tone. The pineapple is no longer untouchable, no longer sacred. It's been played with, poked, prodded, copied, and now laughed at. Not destroyed, mind you, just softened, spoiled, in the way all fads eventually are. You step into a shop selling curiosities, shelves lined with pineapple trinkets, some of them dusty. One labelled Royal Style 1765 sits with a clearance tag. It's charming still, but it doesn't sparkle the way it used to. You get the sense that the fruit's moment in the spotlight is coming to a close. Even pineapple growers begin shifting their focus. Letters from estate managers suggest a pivot toward more useful fruits: peaches, grapes, figs. The novelty has dulled, one writes. Guests now seem to prefer jam. The dream of the pineapple is unravelling, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. It entered every parlour, every party, every punchline, and now, like all overplayed icons, it needs to rest. You exit the shop, stepping back into the street. The wind carries the scent of roasted chestnuts and a hint of rain. A boy passes carrying a tray of pineapple-shaped biscuits, calling out, "Tropical sweets for tired gents." You smile. The fruit may be fading from fashion, but it's not gone. You've walked with the pineapple through its ascent, through its peak, and now its gentle decline. But even as it loses its gilded luster in high society, it doesn't vanish. No, like all icons, the pineapple finds a second life, not in banquets or portraits, but in the hearts of common kitchens and newly chilled pantries. This is the chapter where the pineapple loses its crown, quietly, slowly, and quite deliciously. It begins innocently enough. You're in a new kind of space now, a Georgian kitchen, humming with steam and clatter. Copper pots hang from wooden beams, pies cool on open shelves, and something utterly new whirs faintly in the corner, an icebox. Yes, refrigeration, rudimentary though it is, has entered the scene. Ice harvested in winter is now stored in underground cellars, and clever mechanics are developing insulated cabinets to preserve food just a little longer. Suddenly, the pineapple's fragile flesh doesn't seem so unmanageable. You see more of them in markets now, not often, not cheaply, but no longer in velvet-lined cases either. A pineapple in the 1800s might still turn heads, but it no longer causes swooning. The trend is cooling, both literally and culturally. By the early 19th century, imported pineapples are arriving more frequently. Better shipping techniques, quicker sea routes, and tighter trade systems mean fewer fruits rot on the voyage. They're still expensive, but now attainable. Even middle-class households might buy one once or twice a year. Historians still argue whether this sudden accessibility was seen as exciting or disappointing. Some say people were thrilled to finally taste the real thing. Others suggest that by the time pineapples were affordable, their status had already deflated. The magic was gone. A satirical magazine from 1823 sums it up in one line. We used to worship it, now we pickle it. Quirky aside, pickling pineapple actually did happen. British housewives began experimenting with ways to preserve the exotic fruit, boiling it with vinegar and sugar, stuffing it into jars like jam, even baking it into puddings alongside cloves and nutmeg. One recipe cheerfully proclaims, an ideal winter comfort for those who cannot afford oranges. And here's another twist. Canned pineapple. By the mid-19th century, the technology of tin canning is on the rise, and entrepreneurs leap at the chance to preserve tropical fruit. Factories in the colonies begin processing pineapples by the crate, canning them in syrup and shipping them to Britain, Europe, and eventually America. You hold one of these cans in your hand. The label is colourful, vaguely colonial in theme. The pineapple inside, sliced neatly, ringed like golden gears, shelf-stable status. Now everyone can eat pineapple. Everyone. From chimney sweeps to shop girls. It's no longer a symbol of wealth. It's dessert. It's lunchbox filler. It's Tuesday night. The elite naturally abandon ship. Once a delicacy becomes a common item, it loses its cachet. The pineapple had been a throne of exclusivity, and now it's being spooned onto porridge. One aristocrat, asked in 1831 if he still serves pineapple at dinners, replies, "I serve pears. They bruise less easily and come with fewer colonial complications." That one comment says so much. Because underneath the flavour shift lies another truth. Taste is political. As the British Empire begins to face questions about its practices, as revolts shake the Caribbean, as voices rise against slavery and the exploitation of colonial lands, certain imports begin to feel less appetising. Pineapples, once exotic symbols of conquest and trade prowess, now remind people of sugar plantations, labour abuses and imperial indulgence. The fruit didn't change, the context did. Even architecture shifts. The pineapple motifs that once adorned palaces and pineries are now considered quaint, whimsical relics of a more theatrical time. One estate removes its pineapple gate finials and replaces them with plain orbs. Another repurposes its pinery into a conservatory for roses. And yet, the pineapple lingers. You walk into a seaside tea room in Brighton circa 1845. There's a pineapple upside-down cake on the counter. The hostess wears a dress with tiny embroidered pineapples at the collar. A girl sips pineapple-flavoured lemonade, swirling the straw like she's stirring the tropics into her day. The fruit has settled into a quieter life, no longer outrageous, no longer unreachable. Just there. A flavour, a fragrance, a memory. It's the slowest kind of dethroning, where no one gets angry, no one burns effigies, no one writes grand declarations. The pineapple simply slides down the cultural ladder, rung by polite rung, until it rests comfortably in the pantry. You think of it now like a retired actor, once dazzling, now content to play background roles in pies and jams. No scandal, no bitterness, just soft applause and a long nap in syrup. The crown hasn't disappeared, it's just moved from the pedestal to the plate, and somehow that feels fitting. You're stepping into the present now, leaving behind powdered wigs, pineapple-shaped chamber pots, and banquets that could bankrupt a duchy. But as you look around, you realise something odd. The pineapple never really went away. It's in your kitchen, on your pizza, printed on your beach towel, hanging as a pendant from your neighbour's earlobe. This isn't a comeback, it's a reincarnation. This is the age of the pineapple's quirky legacy. It begins subtly, tucked between Victorian cookbooks and the rise of industrial food. In the 20th century, canned pineapple becomes a staple in pantries across Britain, the United States, Australia, and beyond. It's praised for its sweetness, its long shelf life, and its cheerful exotic flair. The phrase, "a taste of the tropics," begins to pop up in cookbooks, always next to a ring of golden fruit. But then, the pineapple gets weird. And by weird, we mean everywhere. Pineapple-shaped lamps, pineapple-printed shirts, pineapple wedding decor, pineapple pool floats. There's a moment, maybe in the early 2000s, where the fruit becomes more of a design choice than a snack. Home stores sell pineapple bookends. Instagram influencers pose with pineapples as accessories. Someone, somewhere, turns a pineapple into a handbag. And yes, it sparkles. Quirky twist. Pineapples become a symbol in the tattoo world. People start inking them onto their skin, not because they crave vitamin C, but because the pineapple has come to stand for hospitality, openness, and chill vibes. There are even tiny pineapple tattoos behind ears, on ankles, and on biceps, often paired with cursive words like welcome, sweet, or sun. Historians still debate how exactly the pineapple made this shift, from object of elitism to icon of beachy friendliness. Some credit post-war American pop culture, which embraced the tiki aesthetic with an almost comical enthusiasm. Suddenly, pineapples were served in drinks, carved into centerpieces and paired with skewers of maraschino cherries. It became tropical shorthand. And of course, we cannot ignore pineapple on pizza. Yes. That glorious, contentious, late 20th century fusion, the Hawaiian pizza, invented not in Hawaii but in Ontario, Canada, by a Greek immigrant who thought pineapple and ham might taste good together. The world has never recovered. Some love it, some loathe it, some write impassioned essays on its culinary merits, others declare it an abomination against crust and tomato, and yet, there it is, on menus in New York, Tokyo, Johannesburg and Naples, quietly doing its thing. The debate itself becomes cultural canon. Entire social media threads ask, pineapple on pizza, yes or no? Friendships are tested, marriages evaluated. But amidst the laughter and outrage, one thing is clear. The pineapple is still sparking emotion, still carrying weight, still starting conversations, and it doesn't stop there. Pineapples also take on symbolic roles. In the American South, for example, the fruit has long been associated with southern hospitality. A nod, perhaps, to those Georgian and colonial roots. You'll see carved wooden pineapples above doors, on welcome mats, and even dangling from porch swings. In the LGBTQ+ community, pineapples have briefly emerged as subtle signals, playful, coded, welcoming. Though fair warning, so has the upside-down pineapple, with a very different meaning in swinger subculture, but that's a tale for a different bedtime. Even tech gets in on the fun. At one point, a major phone update introduces a pineapple emoji, and it gets used. Often, for jokes, for innuendo, for aesthetics. It's no longer a fruit, it's a mood. You're at a farmer's market now, a real one, present day. You spot a stall selling fresh pineapples. The vendor's sign reads, locally grown, no velvet lining required. You chuckle. A woman beside you asks how to tell if it's ripe. You gently tug on one of the crown's leaves. It slips free. She smiles. You didn't need to rent this pineapple. You didn't need to display it to assert your worth. It doesn't come with scandal or satire or colonial implications, though you still carry that history in the back of your mind. It's just a pineapple. Sweet, tangy, slightly absurd, and yet the echoes are still there. When you see a pineapple lamp, you remember the wax replicas. When you scroll past a pineapple pizza debate, You hear the laughter from that London coffee house. When you walk past a pineapple finial on someone's front porch, you think, they'd have gotten along with Lord Dunmore. The pineapple is no longer about empire or wealth or theatre. Now it's about nostalgia, play, style. It's cheerful, inviting, a little odd, a little regal. The fruit has reinvented itself so many times, you've lost count. But it's still here. From symbol of imperial dominance to edible meme, to tattoo on a surfer's ankle, the pineapple survives. Spiky, sweet, slightly smug, and still watching you from the middle of the table. You sit down now, the journey nearly complete, with the soft weight of centuries resting on your shoulders, and a pineapple resting comfortably in the fruit bowl nearby. Not on a velvet pillow, not framed in a painting, just a pineapple, basking in the gentle hum of your refrigerator's fan. And as your eyes grow heavy, you begin to realize something quietly astonishing. This fruit, this absurdly armoured, sugar-scented tropical gem, has done what few objects ever do. It endured. Through changing empires and crumbling class systems, from colonial plantations to pop art t-shirts, the pineapple has evolved, shape-shifted, and survived. And tonight, as your mind slows and the day's edges begin to blur, you're walking one last time through the final scene of its history. Not a coronation, not a caricature, but a gentle kind of peace. The pineapple is no longer reaching for greatness. It doesn't need to. It's already had its moment as king of the table, the muse of satirists, the obsession of gardeners, and the pawn of empire. Now it rests, no longer a symbol of unreachable wealth, no longer a prop in a paper-thin performance. It's simply part of the everyday, sometimes canned, sometimes fresh, sometimes printed on pool floats, or embroidered into hotel towels, but always there, still noticed, still smiling, and as you settle into the soft rhythm of memory and breath, your thoughts drift back, softly, sleepily, to all the absurd little moments this fruit has passed through. You remember the Georgian hostess wiping a tear as her wax pineapple collapsed in front of guests. You hear the nervous whisper of a clergyman explaining his painted pineapple family crest. You picture the poor servant fanning a fruit for hours, hoping to keep the leaves glossy, just a bit longer. You remember the velvet cases, the candlelit portraits, the smug centerpiece that nobody dared slice. And then you remember the quiet rebellion, the laughter in coffee houses, the parody poems, the moment society looked at the fruit and said, well, perhaps we've gone too far. Yet even that wasn't the end, because the pineapple, ever adaptable, simply changed lanes. It slipped off the pedestal and into the jam jar, into the upside-down cake, onto the controversial slice of ham and dough, into your fridge, onto your socks, into your life, not as a spectacle, but as a companion, a reminder that even the most ridiculous obsessions can, in time, mellow into something sweet, something simple, something familiar. And so, as the candlelight dims in your imagination and the final crinkle of wax fruit fades into shadow, the pineapple says nothing. It doesn't need to. It just sits there, still wearing its crown. So now, dear listener, let your breathing slow, just a little. You've followed a fruit through drawing rooms and dining halls, through satire and scandal, through sugar-dusted banquets and rainy garden walks. You've watched it rise, glitter, bruise, and reinvent itself. And now, at last, it rests, and so do you. Picture yourself in a quiet country kitchen. The windows are fogged gently from the warmth of a banked fire. Outside, the garden sleeps beneath soft moonlight. There are no parties tonight, no portraits to pose for, no guests to impress, just a calm room, a soft chair, and a bowl of fruit, nothing special really. Except, there it is, that pineapple again. Not because it needs to be admired, but because it simply belongs now. Part of the pattern. A golden, spiky little reminder that even the most elaborate dreams eventually settle into stories. Let the weight of wigs and wax and velvet fall away. Let the flickering candlelight turn to darkness. Let the sound of dinner parties drift into silence. There's no more need to perform, no more need to host. Just the quiet comfort of knowing you've travelled far, with a fruit that's seen even farther. Now close your eyes, let the hush of time wrap around you, and sleep.